Hello and welcome to another episode of the AAIM High Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Shin, and today's guest is Jia Shan Lee. Ms. Lee was a former managing director at Goldman Sachs for 20 years, focusing on debt capital markets and corporative derivatives. She's currently the senior vice president and deputy treasurer at Verizon, managing a $150 billion debt and $60 billion derivative portfolio. Please welcome Ms. Lee to the AAIM High Podcast. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Ben, it's such a pleasure for me to be here and to speak to you. I commend you for creating a forum for folks who share similar backgrounds and upbringings to share their life and career lessons. I wish I had this resource when I was in school, but I'm glad to have come across it now. It's never too late to learn, right?
Yeah, thank you. So to start off, we'll first talk about your childhood and upbringing. Because this podcast is centered around being an Asian American leader in business, it is important to first understand each guest's childhood and upbringing as an Asian American. Ideas instilled within you from your parents and environment may have helped you become successful in where you are today. So could you explain your childhood situation growing up? Where, siblings, what were family dynamics like?
Sure, absolutely. So I was born in Beijing, China, and immigrated to the US when I was in first grade. So my
Mm,
father came to the US first as a biochemist. He had a research grant, and then that allowed him to bring my mom and me over. So we ended up settling in Astoria, Queens, which was a predominantly Greek neighborhood at the time. I believe it still is today. And due to China's one-child policy at the time, it wasn't until we were in the US and after much begging from me for a sibling that my brother was born.
And what was it like growing up for you, moving from China to US at like such a young age and having to learn English and try to make friends and like fit in, I guess?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I told you about what a great life we had in China, but in hindsight, we were actually very lucky to come to the US when we did. Shortly after we came to the US, the Tiananmen Square riots broke out in Beijing, so we were very fortunate to have avoided that. But I will tell you a funny story about my first day of school in America. So I was the only Chinese student in my class. Didn't speak much English other than a few random words and phrases that I had learned back in Beijing. So, to welcome me and to make me feel more comfortable, my kind teacher took such a great initiative to bring in a second grader who was also Chinese.
Mm.
So, he spoke to me a few phrases in Cantonese, and when I looked at him with a confused face, my teachers couldn't make sense of why I couldn't understand my own language. So, at the time, there wasn't much appreciation for the contrast between Mandarin, which is what I spoke, and Cantonese, which is what this other student spoke. So they ended up taking me to special ed for further evaluation. So at the time, I proved to be at least good in math, since first graders in China were expected to memorize their multiplication tables, and we were doing long division at the time.
Yeah.
But I would say that, this experience in first grade taught me two lessons. One is don't worry about fitting in, right? If you can play to your strengths and believe in your ability to overcome your weaknesses, it actually helped me to deal with imposter syndrome later in life as I took on new roles and responsibilities. And
Mm.
then the second thing is there's really no substitute for hard work and preparation. So showing up with a positive attitude, being willing to learn and overcome your initial challenges will really get you far in life.
And kind of adding on to like fitting in, I guess, did you ever feel any pressure to like conform to certain expectations, either from your family or from the broader community or like school? And how did you handle that?
Yeah, so I'm actually very lucky, even though I had parents who pushed me very hard to do well. They were always very supportive of my interests, and they always used positive reinforcement to motivate me to work harder in whatever it is that I decided to pursue.
Mm.
So I think they recognized early on that I was curious about business, and my father at the time was trying to direct me towards studying potential international business, given that I was fluent in Chinese,
Mhm.
but they never pushed me one way or another.
Nice. And how did your parents, in your experience, influence your perspective on work and success?
My parents went from being PhD graduates and faculty at Beijing University with a large circle of friends and family to
Hmm.
coming to New York sight unseen, really starting a brand new life and not knowing anyone. So, because of their language barriers, my father started as a junior scientist at a research lab,
Hmm.
and my mother worked at a cashier, as a cashier at the local Chinese takeout while taking care of me. So, the sacrifices my parents made including their choice to settle in a non-ethnically Chinese neighborhood, has always inspired me to work harder, to get out of my comfort zone, and really make the most of every opportunity. So, seeing my parents' journey also helps me to stay humble and is a reminder for me to treat everyone with respect.
Mm. And then were there like any specific experiences or events or lessons that you learned during your childhood that you believed maybe set some foundation for your future success besides that like first day of school story?
Yeah, so I think, nobody in my family ever had any experience in finance. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very new to me, and I wouldn't really have otherwise known about it unless an incident happened in high school. So
Mm-hmm.
this is basically when I was a freshman in high school. I had gotten a volunteer position in my principal's office during the summer of my freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
And he just mentioned, casually in passing, that one of his golf buddies from Merrill Lynch was looking for an intern to join their financial consulting team.
Mm.
So, not knowing anything about finance, I decided to just take a chance. I showed up at the North Tower of the World Trade Center at the time at age 14 in the most professional outfit I had at the time, which was, I still remember to this day, it was a pink cardigan and a jean. It was a jean skirt that I had. And I ended up working under two wonderful managers for 5 years at Merrill Lynch, who, in
Mm.
exchange for helping me them stuff some, marketing envelopes, they would teach me all about various financial and investment products, the power of compounded interest, and most importantly, they taught me the importance of understanding before advising people
Mm.
on some of the things that they care about most, which is planning for the future and well-being of their families.
Mm-hmm. Were you interested in finance before that moment, or like was there some like interest in business before that, or was that like that first time that you wanted to pursue finance?
I think that was really my first exposure to finance. And after that was when I started to explore other facets of finance. So I started in wealth management, right, with Merrill Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
And then during college, I was really fascinated with what I had learned during my high school internship. So I decided to stay in New York City and
Mm-hmm.
attended NYU Stern School of Business, where I could both study and get real work experience through my internships in New
Mm-hmm.
York.
Yeah.
So I ended up interning in corporate communications at Philip Morris and ultimately landed an internship in banking at Goldman Sachs before deciding that that's where I wanted to start my career.
And that brings us to the next part of the podcast, talking about your education and early career. So you briefly mentioned your experience at NYU Stern, but what was that college experience like in getting those part-time jobs during the school year?
Yeah, so having been in New York City, it was very convenient. I was in close proximity to many of the financial institutions. NYU was also really great for offering what they called the Stern Scholars Program at the time.
Mm.
So they gave students an opportunity to spend spring break every year abroad,
Mm.
touring various corporate facilities and learning about their businesses. So we went to Bacardi's rum factory in Puerto Rico. We went to NEC's chip plant in Tokyo, Japan. We
Mm.
went to Moët and Chandon in France to check out their champagne business, and we studied the Iberia Airlines business in Madrid. So I definitely developed the travel bug while I was in college.
Yeah. And what did that process look like for maybe landing that first like job after college?
Yeah, so after having multiple internships, including some odds and ends jobs to help pay for my college, including a weekend stint working at McDonald's drive-through, I decided to start my career at Goldman Sachs, but with an eye towards coming back to corporate at some point in my life because I truly enjoyed my experience working at Philip Morris.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time, I believe my experience at the investment bank would provide me the greatest exposure to a broader range of markets with
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to develop my technical skills. And, I loved every one of the jobs that I had, and I still keep in touch with my former coworkers to this day.
Mm-hmm. And what did that process, or like, how did you land that job at Goldman Sachs initially? And what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so it went from interning at Philip Morris USA during my sophomore year, where I was being able to kind of see firsthand how corporates do large scale M&A, including the divestiture of Miller and Kraft at the time. The company rebranded into Altria. And then I realized the role that investment banks had in that process. So the
Mm-hmm.
next summer, I applied to Goldman Sachs's internship program and I was placed in the controllers group, which is more of an accounting focused role. So I had met an Asian American VP there who made a very deep impression on me. So she convinced me that starting my career at the investment bank would actually give me the greatest exit opportunities in the future if I wanted to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, seeing someone like me who looked like me succeed in the bank made me believe that I could aspire to become like her one day as well.
Yeah, and why did she say that being in investment banking gives you like the best like exit later in your career?
Well, investment banking really prepares you with the technical skills as well as with the ability to work with many kinds of people and clients to solve specific problems that they have. It
Mm-hmm.
also requires a very quick ramp up period to learn all the skills that you need in order to interact with clients early on, and also to be able to execute without any mistakes, right? So attention to detail is also another trait that you develop in investment banking. And when I first started in banking, I had started in the controllers group, as I mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you a story. One day during my daily commute on the train, this was about a year into the controller's job, I bumped into a family friend who saw me studying for the CFA level one at the time because I was very interested in looking into finance in addition to accounting.
Mm-hmm.
And he just asked me where I worked. So it turns out that he was a strategist who worked in the investment banking division of Goldman Sachs. For those of you who may not know what a strategist does, these are literally PhDs in computer science, many of whom were also rocket scientists.
Wow.
So he recommended that I interview for his group. I mean, I knew I was way over my skis, having only taken an intro to C++ class in high school and knowing how to program Hello World.
Yeah.
But luckily, I would manage to impress the hiring manager enough to be referred to a different division because he knew that I wasn't fit for that role. And he thought, my understanding of markets and interpersonal skills could be put to good use in investment banking. That's how I transferred over to banking.
And can you maybe describe your career progression at Goldman Sachs as like starting and then making your way up to managing director?
Yeah, sure. So I started in the emerging markets financing group as a second year analyst within banking. So I'm really, really grateful and blessed to have such an amazing decade-long experience working in that team. I had incredible managers, and we advised countries and banks across Latin America, Europe, as well as Asia
Mm.
that fell into the emerging market category. So if you remember, during this time post the financial crisis, it was really a period of peaks and troughs for emerging markets. And so
Mm-hmm.
we managed to live through the financial crisis. Our team was reduced to less than five people at the time
Wow.
at one point, and we ended up being able to rebuild the team to a team of over 30 bankers, just covering Latin America
Mm.
alone by the time I left the group as a senior vice president.
Mm-hmm.
So, transitioning over to the second decade of my career, when I had my first child, I made the difficult decision to leave that Latin America group
Mm.
and I moved into covering US corporates. It was difficult because I had, as you might imagine, built up very deep client relationships and would have to start over with a new set of clients.
Mm-hmm.
So for the next decade, I did my best to try to balance learning new markets, understanding trends, driving various corporate sectors, and most importantly, developing relationships with my new clients, many of whom I now consider lifelong friends, all the while raising two young kids. So one other piece of advice I would like to share with folks is, once you get to the right time in your life, it's so important to pick the right life partner. The
Mm.
support I get from my husband and our parents in raising our children is honestly the real secret behind my career success.
And what do you think is like your best advice on like relationship building with like your clients, as you were mentioning before?
Yeah, so this is a piece of advice that my boss in Latin America has shared with me early in my career.
Mm-hmm.
He said, your job is to make your counterparty at the client look as smart as possible and as favorable as possible in front of his or her boss,
Mm.
because that way you will gain their trust. They will grow in their jobs along with you, and
Mm.
they will give you valuable information that will allow you to advise them in the best possible way.
Mm.
So the client relationship aspect of it, honestly, is what I love the most about my entire career at Goldman and seeing their successes. So I have multiple stories of, times when we celebrated our joint successes, and that's really, I think, the best part of investment banking.
Mm. And for the people that don't know what debt capital markets and derivatives are. Could you maybe explain exactly what you did in those like sectors of finance, I guess?
Sure. So, for folks looking to enter into the field of finance and specifically investment banking, there are things like mergers and acquisitions, right? Which is the traditional banking as most folks know it.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have the capital markets and derivatives team, which is more markets focused with a broader set of clients, coverage responsibilities. And then you have sales and trading, which is specializing in making markets in specific financial instruments. So I'm biased. I think that capital markets and derivatives offers the best opportunity to build a combination of market technicals and client relationship muscles.
Mm-hmm.
Analysts are expected to quickly get up to speed on various financial instruments, and they have the opportunity to build client relationships and lead transactions very early in their careers. So I'll give you one real life example of what this team does.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say Coca-Cola wanted to acquire a beverage company in France, and they had to pay for the acquisition in euros. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the M&A banker who works on the acquisition, and then the debt capital markets and corporate derivatives team is tasked with coming up with the funding needed to pay for that acquisition. So capital markets would advise Coca-Cola on
Mm-hmm.
whether they should fund with debt or equity and which currency and structure provides the most efficient source of funding.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have corporate derivatives coming in, advising the company on how to manage foreign exchange and interest rate risk. So, for example, if euro appreciates between versus the US dollar between when Coca-Cola agrees to the deal and when they have to pay for it, or if interest rates move higher between agreeing to the deal and issuing debt to fund it, it would be a very costly proposition for Coca-Cola unless they entered into derivative instruments to hedge those risks,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the role of corporate derivatives and capital markets, which at Goldman was a combined responsibility. So it was a very holistic approach to client coverage.
Mm-hmm.
And then outside of these kinds of event-driven M&A situations, companies are constantly working to optimize their balance sheets. So banks also advise on regulatory financing and risk management.
Mm. And because there are so many sectors of finance, did you know what specific sector you wanted to go into at first, or did it take time having to like figure out each like different ones?
Yeah, honestly, I think in real life, you are being put into the sector where you are needed. That was
Yeah.
the case when I entered into Goldman as a first year analyst.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also the case when I moved into a VP role when I moved from Latin America over to US investment grade. So it really depends on where the need is.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up starting with Latin America sovereigns and financial institutions, and then covered industrial companies, natural resource companies, and telecom companies, including Verizon, when I
Mm.
moved to the US coverage team.
Oh, nice. And as the managing director at Goldman Sachs, what did an average work week look like for you?
Yeah, it was very exciting. It was very exhausting as well. I would say 30% of my time was spent traveling, and
Mm.
50% of the time was really spent with clients and understanding their needs and advising on how they can achieve their goals and objectives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 50% very much working with clients. And then 30% of it was working with internal teammates to structure solutions, identify market opportunities, actually have a nice Rolodex of ideas to pull from in various market environments, and also a lot of treasury contacts across corporate America with whom I can bounce ideas off of now that I'm in my current role. And
Mm.
then 20% of it was spent coaching our junior members
Mm.
and spending time on my passion projects. I was a leader in our Asian network, and also I led NYU recruiting for investment banking.
Oh, nice. And then what was maybe like your favorite part of your career? You talked about maybe like your building relationships with clients, but what else?
Yeah, so the reason why I love building relationships with them is I love to see the smiles on their faces when we do a highly successful transaction for them, right? And not only on our clients' faces, but also on that of my team members. I work with some of the smartest people, in my opinion, and it was such a pleasure to do that. So I would say I love the teamwork and creativity that went into solving our clients' problems. And one example of that was when we structured a first of its kind transaction for Mexico. And what they were looking to do is get out of some of their US dollar debt that they had issued
Mm-hmm.
and exchange it for Mexican peso local debt.
Mm.
So they wanted to get paid while doing it. So we offered what we call exchange warrants, which was an option for investors that they could purchase that allowed them to exchange from dollar Mexican government bonds into Mexican peso local currency government bonds at a future point in time.
Mm.
So this transaction went so successfully that the Mexican government hired Goldman to work on all of their subsequent exchange offers, warrants, along with the first ever 100-year bond that was issued during the peak of the financial crisis. And we became a truly trusted advisor for the country.
Wow.
So at the end of it, we had a great time celebrating in Mexico City. And we were hosted by the Minister of Finance for a tour of the National Palace. So those are all memorable moments.
Wow, that's so cool. And then what were some of those like passion projects you just like briefly talked about that you really enjoyed working on?
Yeah, so for Asian Heritage Month, when I was at Goldman, we had hosted 22 events over the course of 22 days
Wow.
during the month of May. So a few of them included having Joe Bay from KKR come and speak to David Solomon, who is our CEO at Goldman. We also had a fashion event where we invited many of our Asian clients to go to a one of the studios of Philip Lim in Soho,
Nice.
and we were able to have a nice, wine and strawberry tasting event while also having the opportunity for Asian professionals to network with one another and many other opportunities to really gather to the community together, including during Lunar New Year.
Hmm.
So that was one passion project that I spent a lot of time on at Goldman. And then the other was really recruiting the next generation of leaders for
Mm.
my alma mater, NYU. So going through that process, it gave me a lot of insight into the caliber of students coming into investment banking these
Hmm.
days and what kind of talent we're looking for.
Yeah. And what were some of those like qualities that you look for in those college students when you recruit for investment banking?
So curiosity
Hmm.
and willingness to work hard and proven demonstration of instances where they went above and beyond in whatever
Mm.
role they did, either in or outside of school. So it's really impressive the broad exposure that some of these students have. Nowadays, we recruit in the summer or even in the fall of the sophomore year of college for investment banking.
Hmm.
And so it's really impressive to see the depth of experience that these students have. One advice that I would give is always speak to as many people as you can within the organization that you're applying to. So many times the most successful candidates are those who spoke to recent analysts in the investment bank, either at Goldman or elsewhere. They understand the culture of the organization and can clearly articulate why they are a good fit.
Mm. And what qualities or skills do you think are most important for success in finance and corporate leadership, like the role you had?
Yeah, so throughout your career, empathy, I think,
Mm.
is really key, right? Understanding what motivates people and always trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person usually results in the best outcome.
Mm.
And this is in instances where you're either trying to solve a problem for them and being their trusted advisor, right? Always making sure that you're giving the advice that is in their best interest as opposed to in the bank's best interest if you
Hmm.
want to develop a long-term trusted relationship. Or in instances where, let's say, you have to share bad news with a client, right? Let's say they wanted to hire you for a specific deal, but you're unfortunately conflicted because you already agreed to work with one of their competitors. Put
Hmm.
yourself in their shoes, understand how they feel, and deliver the message quickly and clearly so that they can, manage accordingly on their side. So empathy, I think, is a very important skill and trait.
Yeah. And what are some misconceptions people may have about working in investment banking or corporate finance?
Yeah, so some folks may think that it's boring and exhausting. The second part may be accurate, but this field is anything but boring. The
Hmm.
exposure that you get to incredible leaders, it's such a privilege, honestly. And having a front row seat to the market during times like, I'm dating myself. Obviously, I saw the financial crisis in 2008, but I also saw the COVID crisis, right, that we
Hmm.
had more recently. And seeing how the markets react and how companies manage around those risks is truly a privilege.
Hmm.
So I find it super exciting. I find it very eye-opening that I don't find the exhaustion, I actually don't mind the exhaustion at all. And I find that many of my colleagues and peers feel the same way. The
Uh-huh.
other misconception is that it's not really a field where women can last, especially if you want to have a
Mm.
family. And I think that's not true. You can certainly balance work and life as well.
Mm. And now we will move on to talk more about your current role as Senior Vice President and Deputy Treasurer at Verizon. So what motivated you to transition from Goldman Sachs after almost 21 years to Verizon?
Well, as you can probably tell, I absolutely love my job at Goldman Sachs,
Yeah.
but opportunities to join an organization as large and impactful and reputable as Verizon at the senior level don't
Hmm.
come around often. So I would have been foolish to turn it down.
Yeah.
Verizon is an iconic brand. It has the largest capital structure in the world,
Hmm.
and it carries a very strong reputation in the market for having one of the most sophisticated treasury teams because of that large capital structure.
Mm.
So I was very eager to have the opportunity to make an impact at a company of this scale. The
Hmm.
other thing is, I had been an advisor for 20 years and I was entering a phase in my career where I wanted to really understand and appreciate what drives decision making at a
Mm.
mega cap corporation. And now I am so lucky to see firsthand how the decisions that we make in Treasury impact the broader organization.
Hmm. And can you maybe explain your day-to-day responsibilities as SVP and Deputy Treasurer?
Sure. So we work together as a team to manage the liquidity of the company. We optimize for the cost of sourcing our $150 billion of debt, as you alluded to,
Yeah.
and we try to minimize the risk of having a $60 billion derivatives portfolio.
Mm.
So we're constantly finding solutions to create value for the broader organization in support of our business leaders.
Mm.
So when I first started, I did my usual listening tour to talk to every member of our team to understand the key processes of how things worked historically and
Hmm.
who the stakeholders are and what their pain points are. So now I spend a lot of my time developing and supporting my team members, brainstorming ideas with internal as well as our external partners, optimizing our framework and thought process around funding and risk management. And we spend a lot of time working on special projects with partners within finance and across other business units as well.
Hmm. And how has your experience at Goldman Sachs shaped your approach in this new role?
Yeah, so having a deep understanding of the markets is critical when you work in treasury, right? And so
Hmm.
knowing all the financial instruments and the tools that you can use in various market environments is helpful. And then having been on the other side of the table is helpful as well. We have relationships with 28 different banks, including Goldman Sachs today.
Mm.
So it's really important for us to know what each of their strengths are and how we can partner best with them on bespoke solutions for Verizon.
Hmm. And what were some of the biggest challenges or difficulties in making this shift or change in jobs?
Yeah, in some ways it was actually quite easy, and I'll start with the
Mm.
similarities. Consensus building and the culture of excellence
Hmm.
is a value that runs our values that run deep both at Goldman and at Verizon.
Mm.
So I'm so lucky to be surrounded by smart and driven professionals who take pride in their work and they're driven to execute with excellence around a common goal.
Hmm.
So at Goldman, I was brought up in a culture where there was no tolerance for shortcuts. Everyone had to agree and sign off before we make an important decision. And I found that the same applies to our finance organization at Verizon now. We're
Mm.
all working under tight timelines because the markets are moving every second of the day. And but you do need to be careful to execute with excellence. You don't take any shortcuts, and you make sure that you get every stakeholder's buy-in.
Mm. And what are some of the difficulties now just working at Verizon in this new job?
Yeah, so whenever you go from a place where you've been for 20 years and you know exactly who to go to for whatever it is that you need to a brand new organization,
Yeah.
it's always challenging because I have to build up my network again, right? So
Hmm.
coming into this role, I already knew some of the folks in Treasury because they honestly were my client before I joined them. So I knew
Mm.
the Treasury team. But learning the inner workings of a massive organization of almost 100,000 people and developing, trusted relationships and partnerships with other stakeholders within the company is something that I continue to work on. And thankfully, so far, it's been quite easy because my colleagues are wonderful. They're really collaborative.
Hmm.
And my boss has actually been a really incredible resource for me. So she has been at Verizon for over 25 years.
Wow.
So she has been able to connect me with some critical stakeholders and key decision makers. So that's made the transition a lot easier.
Hmm.
And we're able to get things done much faster.
Yeah. I know this is a broad question, but like, how do you approach managing Verizon's financial operations?
Yeah, so Verizon is a massive organization,
Hmm.
and the law of large numbers and importance of being patient are two
Mm,
things that the CFO communicated to me when I was interviewing for this job. He said,
mhm,
"You're working with a law of large numbers now.
mm,
Decisions that you make are going to impact the firm, and they are going to have large dollar consequences.
mm,
And you also need, as a result, you need to be very patient and
mhm,
diligent in making these decisions, right? So make sure that you have the patience that it takes to not try to rush into things."
mm,
So I would say that that's exactly how I approach it. I've actually found it to be a positive surprise that because people are so capable and smart and driven, we are still able to work fairly quickly to get to the right decision,
mhm,
making sure that we do get consensus prior to making those decisions. I am excited with a healthy dose of paranoia by the impact our organization's decisions have on the company at the
mhm,
scale of Verizon. Some of the things that we do generate hundreds of millions and in some cases billions of dollars of impact on the financials of the company. So
mhm,
we clearly have to do our proper diligence before executing.
mhm. And what are some key factors you consider when making financial decisions for Verizon?
Yep. So we look at the economics of any particular deal that we recommend or strategize around. We look at the risks around that, access to liquidity, how much are we saving in terms of cost, and also how much additional value we're generating. So just identifying various opportunities to solve problems for our business leaders while optimizing for the key financial results. And
Mm,
in our world, like in my world in Treasury, I see my primary responsibility at the end of the day as future proofing the financial health of Verizon
mm,
while providing our management with optimal flexibility on how they spend capital to grow our business.
mhm. And what is like your favorite part of your job now at Verizon?
I love working with my team. So I've been blessed to be left with such a capable team who are innovative thinkers. They're willing to work hard and they are always looking for continuous improvement, which is exactly what I stand for.
Mhm,
So what are the things that make me most excited about the future? Number one is efficiency and upskilling our teams,
mhm,
developing talent within our treasury organization as well as leveraging technology and AI tools to reduce some of the time spent on menial tasks
mm,
and make all of our jobs a little bit more enjoyable.
mhm,
So, as an example, a gentleman on my team who has done a great job in taking initiatives to lead this Treasury Tuesday idea that we came up with.
mhm,
It's a lunch and learn where various folks internally and externally present on different financial topics. We've been able to leverage AI to summarize those presentations into process documents and white papers for future reference instead of having someone just sit there and take manual notes.
Now we'll move on to the fourth part of the podcast where we talk about challenges and overcoming obstacles as an Asian American leader. Being an Asian American in a leadership role comes with its own sets of challenges. What were some of the obstacles you may have faced in your industry, particularly due to your background?
Ben, I actually never felt that my race or gender was really a hindrance. So
Mm,
when I first joined the Latin American financing team, it was a team comprised of two individuals,
mm,
myself and my boss, Richard,
mhm,
who to this day remains one of the most seasoned and most well-respected advisors on Wall Street.
mm.
Richard, he actually happens to also be an immigrant. He moved to the US from Jamaica as a teenager, and
Wow.
he would always wear a bow tie to meetings. And he taught me that standing out in a sea of Latin American bankers wasn't a bad thing.
Mm,
He always told me, work hard, lead with content and great advice, and make yourself memorable. So,
mm.
being the only Jamaican and Asian pair of bankers traversing Latin America certainly helped us with that last point.
Yeah. And then what role has your cultural background played in shaping your leadership style and perspective as a business leader, and how have you found ways to use it as a strength in your career?
So, having grown up in Astoria, Queens, as someone who had just moved here to America, being comfortable getting outside of my comfort zone throughout my life,
Mhm,
I think has really helped me be willing to take risks and also be empathetic to people of various backgrounds. And in business, no matter what role you take on, you're going to be encountering people with different motivations, different styles, personalities, etc. And
mhm,
so, going back to my earlier point about empathy, right? Trying to find ways to connect with people on some sort of level, even if you may not necessarily have any cultural similarities with them in terms of your background, I think is really key. Some of my best clients are folks in the Midwest or in Latin America who I may have never otherwise met in my personal life if it weren't for some of my opportunities within banking.
hmm And now we'll move on to the final part of the podcast, talking about advice and inspiration. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received throughout your career?
So stay curious and be authentic in how you interact with and you lead people.
hmm
This means being open to new ideas,
hmm
showing up to work as your authentic self, and you know, just I think that all of that shines through when you interact with and lead people. So
hmm
they'll appreciate that, you're doing everything in your power to um, serve what is in their best interest.
hmm
And that I think at the end of the day is what builds trust in business.
hmm And how did you manage your work-life balance in such like a high-pressure industry at Goldman and now at Verizon?
So when I was in banking, I did observe lots of women leave at the VP level in banking. That was typically
hmm
when they were starting to have their kids. And in my case, I very much acknowledge that I'm extremely lucky to have my parents
mm
nearby who helped to raise my 11-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter,
mm
especially during the 18 plus work days, especially during COVID,
Yeah.
right? When we were extremely busy. I also find that you need to make sure that you set boundaries for yourself, but be also willing to make sacrifices and trade-offs.
mm
So, as an example, I really don't mind when I have to work on vacation. Every minute counts. So, why not respond to emails or take calls during your downtime when you're, in the car on your way to Maine, for example, right?
mm Yeah.
And in terms of making trade-offs and sacrifices, while I will not miss my daughter's performance as the starring role in her school play, I am totally fine missing most, if not all, of her hockey practices, right? So you got to just pick and choose your battles. And
Yeah.
then the last thing I'll say is always try to find efficiencies. I talked about how I've become friends with my clients. That comes with a set of benefits, which is they tend to trust me very much. They, will just call me sometimes on the weekends and tell me exactly what it is that they're trying to achieve, as opposed to me wasting my time as well as my team's time coming up with ideas that may or may not go anywhere. So those are ways in which I found better work-life balance.
hmm And mentorship can play a huge role in one's success. Did you have any key mentors or role models during your career? And if so, what was some advice that they gave to you that you now give to younger mentees?
So I have so many mentors. I would say that they're primarily folks who are former and current bosses.
hmm
I have clients who are great mentors to me,
hmm
colleagues, friends, and family. I feel like you can always pick up great advice in all aspects of your life.
hmm
So some of the advice that they've given me are really stay grounded and know how to prioritize what really matters in life, right?
hmm
And so I care deeply about making sure that I deliver for my clients. Back at Goldman, it was for external clients. Now I have one client, which is Verizon, and I
hmm
want to do my very best to, perform to the best level for the company. At the same time, I can only do so if I have a well balanced life, and so I think one of the best pieces of advice is when somebody told me, make sure that you cater to what really matters to your personal life first before you prioritize your work too much. So
hmm
that's what I carry with me.
Yeah. And how do you stay motivated, especially during difficult times in business?
Yeah, so my team keeps me motivated. I absolutely love celebrating our joint successes. Just as a recent example, we completed a highly successful transaction this week,
mm
and we did a first of its deal for a first of its kind deal for Verizon, and the whole team got together on a Monday. We popped over opened some champagne, had modest amounts, so that it was okay, and then we were able to celebrate together. We also have certain team building events that we do, especially around the holidays and making sure that we achieve success to be able to continue to enrich the livelihoods of our team members is what really matters a lot to me. The
hmm
average tenure of a Verizon employee is 12 years.
Wow.
And I had a recent team member who retired who had spent over 30 years at the company. So this job and this company is their livelihood. And so, making sure that we're successful in our roles just motivates me to make sure that we can continue to support the livelihoods of all these employees.
And for the last question for the podcast, if you were to go back to the start of your career, would you change anything or would you tell yourself anything?
Yeah, so I actually got a great piece of advice from my most recent manager at Goldman Sachs as I was leaving. And this is something that I put into practice probably starting about 5 years ago, which is at the end of every year, put together a one pager to help advocate for yourself.
Mm.
We as Asian Americans, we typically do not like to toot our own horn. We feel uncomfortable doing that. But I've come to realize that it's a good way to help yourself, right? Or help your manager help yourself. Because if you might imagine, these managers have so many people who report to them. So if you can come up with, let's say, a best hits of any given year in terms
Mm-hmm.
of contributions that you've made and goals and objectives that you hope to achieve in the coming year, it just makes your manager's job easier when it comes time to either pound the table for your raise, for a promotion, and also just for the broader benefit of your entire team as you rise within the organization. So
Mm.
advocate for yourself by putting together good talking points for your manager once you start a job.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I love learning about your journey and your career. Thanks so much for all the pieces of advice.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Take care, Ben.
Take care.